And we're back. Again, we're back. We're back. MoJoe, thank you again for setting up the studio, as you always do. Always appreciate it.
No problem. My pleasure. And today we're talking with George Pyle.
George Pyle.
Editorial page editor of the SLTrib.
Yes.
He's also worked in Kansas, and he's worked in Buffalo. He's been around for a few.
So let's get personal then. We did almost an hour just a minute ago.
Depending on when you're listening to this. Yeah.
The health of the newspaper industry. We talked about that for a while. We talked about homelessness in Salt Lake. And
so where'd you grow up, George? Where'd you grow up? High school and college?
I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and my parents. I was the first of four. We lived there for like 8 months, and then my father got a job as city manager of McCook, Nebraska.
McCook,
Nebraska, southwest Nebraska, practically Kansas.
City manager is essentially mayor.
Well, yeah, I mean it's there's some in Utah. Kansas and Nebraska.
They differ.
Yeah, Kansas and Nebraska. I mean, it just kind of depends on the tradition and the way the state laws are written about how city governments are set up, because every city generally has to pick a form of government that is on a list by the state that's passed by the state legislature. So Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Missouri, there's a lot of cities that you get to, 8,000 people, and they have a head of the city government who runs everything on a day-to-day basis, police, fire, streets, all that stuff.
City administrator.
And some places it's called an administrator, some places it's called a manager.
Well, they approve budgets and hirings and firings?
They write the budget. I mean, they hire and fire the police chief, the fire chief, the utilities director, all those people, the city engineer, do contracts, all that kind of stuff. The big thing in the pre-computer days was my family, when my father was the city manager later of Hutchinson, Kansas, the way the city budgets are done is very strictly prescribed by state law. It has to be done. You have to do this on a certain date. You have to publish the proposed budget on a certain date. You have to have a hearing within a certain window. And the budget has to be approved by the city council by a certain time.
Essentially, the board of directors has to approve it.
Right. They're elected. And most of the cities, an awful lot of the cities in Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, they have some of them, they call it a commission form of government. They call it a city commission rather than a city council. They have 5 or 7 members, sometimes by district, sometimes just at large. The mayor is just one of the members of the council. Often it just rotates year to year. Wow. And the only power the mayor really has is he sits in the middle, he presides, he cuts the ribbons, he signs the documents. And he has one vote on the council, just like everybody else. And the council hires the manager. And some managers don't last very long. Some managers last a long time. It's totally at the pleasure of the city council, city commission.
How well things work.
And how well things work. But the joke in my family was that our family summer vacation was always in early August, because that was the window between when the budget was publicized
and you might be gone,
and when the public hearing had to be. So there were 2 weeks by state law.
That's funny.
Here's when the budget goes out for the people to see. 2 weeks later, here's when they have the public hearing, and if all goes well, the city council goes ahead and approves it. Those 2 weeks were the only time that we could afford to be out of town. Wow. And a lot of times, too, it was because this pre-computer age, you would write the budget on pieces of paper, send it to a printer, and he would print 1,000 copies of it. That took a week. So you'd skip town for a week while that was happening.
Why did it take a week?
Well, that's how you used to print things, And it was very careful. It was a very painstaking kind of thing. It had to be bound and everything. And so the idea was the budget's at the printer. There's nothing else for me to do right now. Let's go to Estes.
How long was your dad?
Let's go to Estes Park. He was city manager in McCook for about 10 years. And then
McCook,
M-C-C-O-O-K. Apparently there was a Civil War general, Alexander McDowell McCook, that the town, he was never there, but they named the town. They named the town after him.
You grew up in Nebraska and Kansas?
Yeah, Missouri, Nebraska, and Kansas. I went to, and then Hutchinson.
Midwestern to the core.
Plains guy.
Had a paper route growing up.
And, I'm sorry?
You had a paper route growing up.
Yeah, no, I didn't. No, actually, I didn't. I remember.
That surprises me. That surprises me.
An awful lot of people who are newspaper reporters, at least my age.
I had a route. My sister had a route. My older brother had a route.
My wife had a route.
No, I didn't. I actually didn't do that. But I remember. I mean, especially when we lived in Hutchinson, which is a town of about 60,000 people right in the middle of Kansas, we had lived in McCook. My mother continued to take the McCook Daily Gazette by mail just to keep up on her old friends and my old classmates and stuff. So we got the McCook Daily Gazette by mail. We got the Wichita Eagle delivered in the morning. We got the Hutchinson News delivered in the evening. We got the New York Times, Sunday New York Times, that would come on Wednesday in the mail. And the New York Times in those days was like, 6 inches thick. The Sunday Times with all the ads and everything.
Sunday papers were always cheap.
And
lots of ads.
So,
lots of coupons.
they'd print it on Saturday night. It would show up in Hutchinson on Wednesday. The newspaper, the mailman would deliver it on Wednesday. And the joke was that we took the paper. The lawyer next door took the New York Times, Sunday New York Times. The funeral director on the other side of him took the New York Times. So here comes the postman every Wednesday with 3 of these. And it's like, postman hates us. So, I didn't have a paper route, but boy, I grew up reading newspapers in McCook.
Sounds that way. Wow.
In McCook, the Omaha World Herald in the morning and Sundays, and the McCook Gazette in the evening. And and that was what you did was read newspapers.
Where were you when you graduated from high school?
So I was in Hutchinson when I graduated from high school. I went to Wichita State University, which just down the road. And they had because I was interested in journalism, they had both print and broadcast programs. And technically I'm a broadcast journalism major, but I've never worked in broadcasting.
I think you'd be good in broadcasting.
And I do radio. I've done television. I found out I was going bald because I was on Kansas Week, and they did the TV, and they do this thing, where like you're talking and the camera's behind me, and they're taking a picture of you while you're talking. You can kind of see the back of my head. Yeah. And you can kind of see the back of my head, and I go, man, I'm going bald. Why didn't anybody tell me? So,
hey, man, you're not bald in the back. You're looking really good from the very back.
That bald spot that you get first, and then it moves forward. So that's how I learned about that.
How many siblings do you have, if any?
I'm the oldest of 4. I have a brother who now lives in Hiroshima. He's lived there for a really long time.
The nuclear bomb place?
Yeah,
really?
Right. And he went there to teach English and never left.
Wow.
How long has he been there? That's interesting. Let's get him on the podcast. What's his name?
His name is Eric. He's been there for 20, 25 years now. I keep having to think about that because it's been an awful long time. Like I say, he's an artist. He's a writer. He's a
artist and writer.
And he was working for galleries in New York City. And
Andy Warhol days?
Yeah, well, this would have been like in the 80s, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
And the Pace Gallery and some pretty fancy places. And a friend of his went over to Japan and to teach English. And they hire people from England and America to go to Japan and teach English. And they say, we don't want people who speak Japanese. We want you to come to the school with all these Japanese people who have sort of started to learn English already.
Well, that don't make no sense.
And they've had the high school English class, but that's kind of academic. They want to learn how to really speak English the way native speakers speak it.
Immersion.
So immersion, exactly. And so they say, now come over here and we'll teach you how to teach English to people who speak Japanese, but don't speak Japanese. If you speak Japanese, then they don't have to speak English. Yeah. We need to make them speak English. So make them speak English to you.
Well explained.
Well, now he speaks English. Now he speaks Japanese.
I was going to say, he must by now.
And as a matter of fact, he married a Japanese woman. He was visiting my family one time, and he and his wife are whispering to each other in Japanese. And my father says, you don't have to whisper. I can't understand a word you're saying.
That's good.
Does he ever visit Utah, or do MoJoe and I need to go to Japan to podcast?
No, he hasn't. He hasn't. He come back to see the family in Kansas, but once in a while he hasn't been here. We ought to go see him, but I haven't worked out that yet.
That'd be fun. Oh, by the way, we've got a 4th headphone that we can do. We can do with a 4th. If your brother would like to be on the podcast.
Okay, well,
that'd be awesome.
I can find his information someplace.
Well, we'll talk about that after we wrap this up, and we're showing you to the door. So let's get a little further in then. So may I ask, for how many years have you been married? I'm getting personal. Forgive me.
Put him on the spot.
76.
1976?
No, 1996. 1996.
Oh.
Because Yeah, we went to high school together. Then we went off and married other people, and then for 20th high school reunion, we got back together and got married a little bit after that.
So cool.
And so it's been 1996, and so that was when I was the editor of the newspaper in Salina, Kansas.
Salina.
And
I think I've driven through there.
Yeah, well,
I did too.
Yeah,
I drove through Salina.
I-70 goes right by there, and if people, I mean, you can I-70 goes north of town. You can barely see the city. But it's there. All the exit signs say Salina over here.
Is there a Denny's?
And there probably is. Now, what there is in Salina is the Cozy Inn. The Cozy Inn, which is this hole-in-the-wall burger joint right in the middle of downtown. And it's kind of like White Castle, but there's only the one. Mm-hmm. And it's and everybody knows when you've been there because it's so oniony. That everybody know, you've been to the Cozy Inn, I say. So people who know the area, when they're driving, they're like starting in Kansas City or Lawrence, and they're driving to Colorado to go skiing. They come off the highway, run down, go to the Cozy Inn, grab a sack of 12, because they're tiny little things. Cheeseburger. They're basically
sliders, right?
Right. Well, yeah, now we do. Yeah, they don't call them that, but that's what people call them mostly now. They're basically an onion sandwich with a meat garnish. And,
sounds like a cotton bottom with their garlic burger.
Exactly.
So people who don't go to Salina for any other reason go to the Cozy Inn.
Nice.
Drive down, grab the sack of burgers, get back on the highway, and go on to Denver or Estes Park or someplace.
That sounds like road trip heaven, man.
Yep.
That's awesome.
And it's still there.
George, what do you predict for 2020 coming up?
Oh, boy.
I know it's going to be entertaining.
Well, I think so.
May I lead into this?
Or terrifying.
Well, I was going to say, and you're getting into where I wanted to go now.
Yeah.
So you got Bill Maher, just about every show he's on now. He's like saying, look, guys, Trump may not leave. I mean, the election he won, he said it was rigged. Well, he's pretty much going to say this one was rigged. It's pretty much guaranteed.
If he loses,
What if he wins? I mean, do you see him leaving?
I know.
Because I think an article I read, you actually called the Trump administration like a fascist organization. And now with these recent court things happening, with the bar reducing the sentence of Stone and Trump's tweets, I mean, it's getting crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, you can draw a scenario where things get really bad and things, get even violent. I think a more likely scenario, if he does lose the election, and it's pretty obvious that he's lost the election, it's not like it comes down to some few ballots in Florida or
Chads.
something.
Like
let's hope it
right. But if it's pretty obvious that he's lost the popular vote, he's lost the electoral vote, he should be out. And then, he said, well, but
it's rigged.
It's fixed. It's rigged. I'm not leaving. Well, then we have, thank God for the deep state.
no, let's focus on that for a moment. Thank God for the deep state. We are told to despise the deep state.
No. Thank God for the deep state.
The deep state.
If he's voted out of office, and it's especially electoral vote, he loses the electoral vote. They have the electoral vote. He loses. They will turn off the phones. They will take away the football. They won't give him the nuclear codes. And if he insists on staying in the White House, fine. Set up President Warren or Sanders or Biden or whoever it is in the Klobuchar.
Yeah.
Set him up in the Treasury Department in a secure environment. Set him up in the Pentagon. Have him be the real president, and just unplug the phones. So he can't do anything.
Bill Maher should listen to this. Bill Maher should
because
listen to
Barr's
this.
been asking the Democratic. I lost the word. He's asking Buttigieg and Klobuchar what they're going to do if Trump doesn't leave.
What will you do?
And they have no answer.
No.
They laugh it off.
Well, that was a good answer.
It's never happened.
It's a good answer, but Trump is still commander-in-chief until the 21st of January.
But after that,
you're going to turn off the phones on the commander-in-chief?
Yeah. Well, at noon on the 20th, he's not president anymore.
They start painting the White House.
He's not president anymore.
Here comes the paid cruise.
He's not president anymore, and the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy, they won't listen to him anymore. They won't.
I hope you're right,
orders.
but look, we got a Supreme Court that decided in favor of Bush, and right now it's more right leaning than it was then.
But there's not even something to come before the Supreme Court.
Like you say, if it's a big win, then
if it's clear
close,
that he's lost, or if it isn't the kind of thing where it's clear that the only way we're going to know is how Florida turns or how Ohio turns or something like that, and that comes down to it, then yeah, it could get pretty messy. But if he loses the election and everybody knows he's lost the election, the rest of the government just will say, okay, you're not president anymore.
I don't think there's going to be civil war. There's not going to be civil war in the streets. I really don't think that's going to happen.
We're too busy trying to
because there are too many.
If he wins or loses, I don't think there will.
Well, there will be some diehards out there who will do some bad things.
They might shoot up a Comet Pizzeria where Hillary did her thing,
And there is some danger that there will be some violence, but I think the main thing is that the civil servants who have taken an oath to the Constitution and take their job seriously, and the military officers and the Justice Department and all those people, I can't see them saying, well, he lost the election, but we're going to pretend like he's president anyway. They're not going to do that.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
I hope you're right.
Now, it's a loss that everybody can look at and say, look, he lost. And if he continues to say, no, I didn't, I got to be president forever, the world will fall apart if I'm not president, it's all fake, it's all rigged, and nobody else supports
that. Kind of part of it? That was part of their argument in the impeachment trial, was that, well, if he's doing it for the good of the people, then it's legal.
Right. And but I don't.
I heard that. I remember hearing that.
I don't see it coming to that. But
I don't either.
Well,
not even Lindsey Graham, McConnell and Lindsey Graham, I think, would come back to their senses.
No, they would say no.
But now the First Amendment's under attack, right? I mean, there are these BDS laws that they're passing, and Texas is passing, and I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of Abby Martin. You heard of her? She's a progressive-leaning reporter, and she's worked on the Empire Files and other things like that. But she got barred from talking at some college or something, I forget where, because she wouldn't sign the anti-BDS thing. And so they said, "Oh, then you can't talk." If you're not
I remember that. Yeah.
And so she's suing now on behalf of the First Amendment. And the case could go all the way to the Supreme Court. And who knows how they're going to rule?
Yeah. The Supreme Court is kind of iffy.
And so much happens on Twitter these days. With Trump using Twitter like that, and right after that court case got filed, Benjamin Netanyahu started tweeting like, we've lobbied hard for these laws in these states, and they're just coming right out in the open and they're saying it nowadays. They're not even trying to hide their crimes anymore. The fact that they're paying for influence. It's a
different world we're in. There's no doubt. It's a different world that we're in.
No, it's different, and it is partly because of the social media that gets around. Self-serving here, but the traditional media, the traditional gatekeepers for all this kind of information.
Yeah. This is self-serving. Thank you for saying that. You're acknowledging.
And that's what kind of bothers me, is how it's tough for people to say, okay, well, this is the National Enquirer and this is the Salt Lake Tribune. They're different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it almost seems like people can't tell the difference anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is really scary, because when we first started having the internet and we first started having social media and we first started having all this kind of stuff, the idea was great. Now everybody will have access to information.
It's going to be there,
and people won't be dumb anymore. People will be smart because they will have access to the whole sum of human knowledge in their pocket, literally.
That failed, didn't it?
It failed because we flame each other and watch cat videos, and instead of using it for what it could be used for. And there is some hope, I think, from the younger generation who has grown up with this stuff, because there's been some research to indicate that they're people who are vulnerable to Russian bots on Facebook are the older people. And you think, well, older people aren't on social media. Well, yes, they are. I mean, largely it was originally just so they could communicate with their family. They could communicate with their family.
That's why I'm on
So
Facebook,
now they're seeing all this stuff, and, well, it must be true because I'm getting
I
saw it there. Like when Walter Cronkite told me it was true.
Right.
So now when Fox News and Breitbart,
MSNBC and CNN,
they tell me it must be true.
Well, how many people get fooled by the Onion?
Really? Oh yeah. How many people think? Well, it's hard to run the Onion these days, though, because you got to come up with funny stuff that isn't what really happened, and what really happens is weirder than the funny stuff they can come up with.
Well, I gotta say, Trump is correct. There is fake news out there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There always
definitely
has been.
Out there.
But but there is. I mean, I think there's hope, because I think the older people who are more likely to say, well, I saw it on Facebook, it must be true. I saw it on TV, it must be true. A lot of the younger people, they know how to do this. They know that they can do fake stuff.
Yes, they do.
Because they can do it.
Do. They're better at it than us 50-year-olds.
Right.
They're
so
better.
they can do it. They know how it's done. They know how emotions and facts are manipulated because they do it all the time.
Interesting.
And even though with a lot of young people, there's real problems with like people being bullied and things online, but still, for the most part, younger people are a little bit more savvy to this kind of stuff, and they look at this stuff and they're a little bit more likely to say, that's bullshit. I ain't buying that. Whereas people my age are more likely to say, well, And especially there's always the confirmation bias that, and I mean, this has been around since there's been any such thing as the internet. I mean, I know running newspapers all these years, if there's something on page 1 that fulfills your biases, then it's like, well, it's in the newspaper, so it must be true. And if there's something on page 3 that disagrees with your biases, then it's like a damn newspaper. They can't get anything right. When you just pointed to the front page as proof that you're right. You point to page 3 as proof that the newspaper can't get anything right. So there's always confirmation bias that existed as long as there's been a printing press.
Everywhere. And it all comes down to the information of the voters. Are they willing to do the research and go not just to one source or 2 sources, but many 5, 6, 7 sources and see different.
Again, it doesn't seem like they're able to tell the difference between the front page and the opinion pieces or the editorial pieces, and the National Enquirer and the Salt Lake Tribune or Fox News, good. Christopher Wallace, good. The opinion from Sean Hannity, that's not news. That's an opinion.
Right. And they will tell you that. They're honest about that. These are people's opinions, but at the same time, it's on a news channel.
Exactly.
And so people don't always catch the difference. And that is kind of the thing as we move online. I mean, in print, it's a little bit more obvious. In the Salt Lake Tribune and the Washington Post and anybody else, there's this big opinion label at the top of the page, and it's pretty obvious that these are the pages that have people's opinions. Yeah. Online, it can be a little bit harder to tell. We try and label these things. It'll say column, it'll say opinion, it'll say commentary. But still, it kind of gets mixed up with the other stuff.
Or I even saw stuff where it says advertisement in small print.
Oh, yeah.
They write whole articles, and it's an advertisement.
Yeah. Well,
I forget what the name of that is. There's a name for that.
Well, there's native advertising and things like that. And that's always been a problem. I mean, there's like, we've always had, we talked earlier about, the influence of donors and foundations to the nonprofit model. Right. We've always had advertisers who, especially big advertisers, car dealers, department stores, things like that. Yeah. And there was always the risk. It didn't really play out very often in real life, but there was always the risk that some advertiser would say, I don't want you to say that, or I'm mad at you that you said that.
I'm pulling my ads.
And they would do it sometimes. And it was kind of like, well, as a newspaper editor, like in the 1960s, you would say, well, if you pull all your newspaper advertising out of my newspaper, you're cutting your own throat.
Exactly. Back in the day, you had to have ads in the paper and on the radio, or else you were screwed.
So, maybe they'd pull away for a week or a month to make their point, and then they'd
watch their profits fall.
Right, and then come back. And the Hutchinson News, when I was a kid, Kansas had this thing where cities could start, and most places across the country have it, but this was relatively new then. They would have a city could vote in its own sales tax, and in addition to the state sales tax. Now, most places across the country have that now, but this is in the 60s, and at least in Kansas, it was kind of a new thing. And the Hutchinson News editorialized in favor. It was a ballot question. The city council couldn't do it by itself. You had to put it to the ballot. And they editorialized, yes, we should have a local option sales tax. It's before the voters, so it's not being snuck in on you. You should vote for it because we need the money for X and Y and Z, whatever it was. And that made the car dealers really mad because they thought they would, if the car dealer was in Hutchinson and they had a local option sales tax, and the car dealer over here in Buhler or Nickerson didn't have a local option sales tax, then they would be at a competitive disadvantage. It's not that much, but, it's a low-margin business, so they were worried about it.
Sure.
And they threatened to boycott the advert, and they did for a while. They pulled their ads.
Interesting.
And the editor said, fine. I'm not going to set up my editorial opinion to please you guys. Yeah. I'm serving my readers. I'm serving my community. And they came back because their sales went down. And I mean,
because their sales went
because their sales went down. I mean, they weren't advertising the newspaper in the first place for the benefit of the newspaper.
Right.
That's silly. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
I mean,
after I lost $200 on Google Ads, I didn't put $200 more dollars in there. It didn't work.
No, and we had I made some people mad when I was in Salina. I was in wrote editorials in favor of same-sex marriage before that was quite the thing it is now.
Wow.
And a couple of people, and they really did.
What year was that?
This would have been,
how long have you been the same-sex marriage advocate? Since what year?
This was like 1998.
You were ahead of your time, man.
I was behind Andrew Sullivan, but I was ahead of most other people.
Well, you're ahead of Hillary Clinton. I know that.
Oh yeah, no, all these people, and really,
you were ahead of me too.
Sometimes, I think sometimes we forget how fast that moved. And sometimes I mean, to me, it's obvious. Of course, we should have marriage equality. Of course. But we didn't for 200 years, and we changed pretty fast. I mean, Barack Obama turned around on that. Hillary Clinton
you might
turned
even
around
give
on that.
Biden some credit for that.
Yeah,
he kind of pushed Obama
he was
into
pushing
it.
Obama for that.
He put the shotgun right behind Obama's skull.
No, he went out.
Said,
He went out and said, "I'm for it," and then it was kind of like,
did,
"Oh man, we got to kind of get our act together."
Well, I guess I'm for it too.
Yeah, I'm for it
Here
too.
we go. Yeah.
And so even though to me it's kind of like, oh, that's bleeding obvious. Of course we should. It should be have marriage equality. I think you do kind of have to step back a little bit and realize that this is new. And this changed really fast.
Yeah.
It's new and it's tough on society.
Yeah.
It really is. You gotta. They're not all going to come to it the same way you do. There's going to be opposition. There's going to be a problem.
Yeah, but I think, more and more. I mean, it's Supreme Court decision. I guess is what 5 years now, 6 years.
Is it 5? Yeah.
I don't know, but it's not much has really changed except for the people who are directly affected by it. Nobody else's life has been changed, and they're starting to realize that. And society didn't fall.
Well, what I love so much about it, though, George, is that even my Republican friends, who I love and admire, that they are very much in favor of gays doing what they want to do on their own time.
Live and let live.
Let them do their own thing.
Right.
30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was not like that at all. No. We cannot allow this. This cannot be allowed. Today, it's different. Today, it's better.
Yeah.
It's better today.
And I think the main thing is that now more and more people know somebody who's in a same-sex relationship.
They're dentists,
and they can't. I mean, Harvey Milk did this back in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had some kind of ballot initiative or something where they the pro-gay rights people won the ballot initiative, and on election night, Harvey Milk comes out there and he says, "Okay, the only reason we won this." It wasn't just gay people voting for this. It couldn't have been. We wouldn't have won if it was just gay people voting for this.
Couldn't have happened.
Straight people voting for this is the only way we won. Now, how do you thank your straight friends? And how do you thank friends? Well, you come out and you tell people and you trust people and you go from this election to say, look, maybe they don't all hate us. So let's come out and let's be their friends and let's be obvious and let's be real. And that's kind of where it really turned, I think, is that once you know somebody,
it does make a difference
in your workplace, in your family, in your church,
your friends,
and you realize that they don't breathe fire and they're not trying to recruit your children and they're just people, then all of a sudden that just becomes normal.
Yeah.
And that turned in the scope of human history, it turned on a dime.
It really did. Yeah.
Good point.
Yes, it did. Yeah. Well, George, may I give you what we call the 10-second pepper?
Sure.
I just pepper you with very short questions, like 1 or 2 or 3 word questions, and they're not even questions, but you just give your response.
Sure.
And you've got 10 or 20 or 80 seconds to respond.
And I can edit all this too. So
Okay, now please. I
Yeah,
can't clear my throat in 40 seconds.
MoJoe's a great editor.
and go.
All right, let's start with main pepper number 1, abortion.
Abortion is safe, legal, and rare, or women are second-class citizens.
Are you afraid of it being overturned?
I think there's some risk of that, but I think the worst that could happen is that the Supreme Court would say it's not a constitutional right, and then it would go back to the states. And there are some states where nothing will change, and there are some states like this one where it will change, and after a while, people will realize they don't want to live in those states.
10 seconds. Perfect. Yeah. Gun laws.
I think we have way too many guns. I don't have a lot of faith that laws will stop that, but I do think because laws don't stop a lot of things. But I think things like background checks and age limits and things like
common
that
sense stuff
are common sense, and limits on how fast a weapon can be fired and how many bullets it can carry.
Can't carry bazookas.
And yeah, I mean, you can't have. I mean, everybody can have a pistol. Nobody can have a shoulder-mounted nuclear weapon. So in between there, someplace is the line that we ought to be able to draw.
Very nice, yeah. Military budget.
It's too big. Part of the reason that we were talking about earlier about how come every other country has health care and we don't, well, they don't spend as much on defense as we do. So they have money to pay for health care. It's hard to point to this or this or this and say that's what's out of line. But it is interesting how, like around here, you know, if they want to put money, if the federal government wants to put money into Hill Air Force Base, it's like, oh, good, the money will come in and it will multiply through the economy and it will be great. If the federal government wants to put money into health care, oh, God, no, that's spending too much money, completely ignoring the fact that it will have a multiplier effect through the economy and do all kinds of other things.
Yes, allow people to start new jobs, allow people to switch jobs.
Right, right, and it doesn't kill people, so it's not as interesting.
Moving on. Social democratic health care.
That is, I think, what the civilized world has, and I think that's what we're moving to. I think that it probably will be in stages. Some people, I think, don't realize that in Canada, technically the provinces run it.
Right. I've heard it's better in some provinces than
others. And it's better in some than others. Yeah. And as a theory, I wouldn't have a problem with it being state by state, but in terms of managing it and deciding who's going to actually deliver it on the ground, but it just makes sense. And there's no country that's gone to it and then abandoned it because it works.
Oh, although they do chip away at it.
Yeah, has anybody ever abandoned universal
health care?
No,
they argue back and forth. They argue back and forth. Well, you talk about the defense budget. They argue back and forth like we argue back and forth about the defense budget. Should it be this many billion or this many billion? Do we need this many aircraft carriers or that many aircraft carriers? Right. And in countries that have
like the UK
national health care, they say, how many do we need more doctors? Do we need more nurses? Do we need more hospitals? Is this hospital operating well? They take it as granted that you will have national health care, but there's still a lot to argue about in terms of how much money it costs, how much the doctors should be paid, how much the nurses should be paid, how long is too long to wait for a hip replacement. They still argue about that stuff, and we always will.
Always will. All right, last one. Well, no, I don't have another one. Those are great answers. George Pyle, Mr. George Pyle.
That includes the 10-second pepper.
Joins us from the Salt Lake Tribune. He's been there for many years. And may I ask another question?
Sure.
Not a 10-second pepper. Wow. Have you done any other writings? Do you have any volumes out there?
Yeah.
I have one book that I published. Is called... what's it called? Raising Less Corn and More Hell, which is an old expression from the old progressive.
Raising less corn and more hell.
Which is an old expression from the progressive politics of Kansas back in the 1890s. And it's about agricultural policy and how screwed up it is. His book came out in 2004 or something like that. And the really sad thing is nothing has improved since. So it kind of is...
Raising less corn, though, is this do with the ethanol thing and the gas
that's
and
part of it. Ethanol, the things that they subsidize, I mean, they subsidize corn, wheat, rye, cotton, things like that, just because. Also, because those things are relatively stable, you can store them. I mean, they don't subsidize
and they grow easily. They grow like weeds,
and they don't subsidize peaches and pears because they spoil, and you can't put them in a government warehouse and ladle it out later. Also, because we've always done it this way.
I know one farmer that got paid not to grow something. He had no intention of growing that.
Yeah,
thing.
no, and that's part of it. Was part of what the book is about. Is the idea that these programs are supposed to help, yeoman farmer Alvin York survive another season.
Joe farmer.
And they do, or they have. But most of the money goes to the corporate farms, the big things. And the research has shown that small farms and big corporate chemical farms, the output per acre is about the same.
Really?
The output per man hour on a corporate farm, you get more output per man hour, a lot more. But you use a lot more chemicals. You have monocultures that are destructive of the environment.
Interesting.
They go into all this kind of GMOs, which are not dangerous in the sense that they're bad for you to eat, but they're dangerous in the sense that they mess with the ecosystem. And they're really a bad idea because only the chemical companies profit from them. The farmers don't really benefit.
Interesting. I want to have you back just to talk about farming, man.
Yeah, I didn't know.
I didn't know you had that kind of knowledge.
That was after being in Kansas for a long time and realizing that I really didn't know as much about agriculture as I should.
Wow.
So I
went
and learned about it.
That's cool. I want to have you back to talk about agriculture.
Okay.
Are you going to be staying in the Salt Lake Valley for a while, George? We want to have you back.
Yeah.
Will you come back?
As far as I know, I mean, unless this nonprofit gig thing doesn't work out, I don't see.
I'm rooting for it, and
else.
I'm going to seriously consider a subscription for you and Pat Bagley, two of my favorites, and talk to those guys about the number of ads in this five articles a month thing. I think that could really work.
They're aware of it, and I mean, in an ideal world, we would do so well. Excuse me, we would do so well from donations, large and small.
Yeah. I think it could work.
So much money.
I see
from
it work
that.
for the Hale Theater. I don't, SLTrib is at least as big an institution as Hale Theater is in this town. I mean,
so ideally, if you were designing this in a way that would just work out perfectly, we'd get so much money from donations, both from just average readers and from big corporations and from big foundations, and that we would do so well that we would be a lot less reliant on advertising, and we might someday, knock on wood, even not have to have a paywall. I don't see that happening.
I don't either.
But in an ideal world, that would be the direction you'd go in.
Right.
Because the things like ProPublica that started as nonprofits, they don't have paywalls.
But I think it's kind of important to have at least some access to, because what you do is important, right? So you want to give the average Joe, the guy that can't afford a subscription, maybe a few articles a month to stay up on things.
Well, also, I mean, we do have it. You can. I mean, this isn't ideal, but it's something. Access is free at public libraries, and we have deals at some college campuses where students can get I don't know if it's free or
and
discount,
as it is right now, I've read 3 or 4 of your articles in the past week, and they haven't shut me off yet. So
no.
Grateful for that.
Well, okay. Nobody's listening to this.
No, we got 11 subscribers.
What it is, it's 7 a month now that you get before you hit the paywall.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
That's 7 on your phone, 7 on your tablet, 7 on your home desktop, 7 on your work desktop,
and your TV.
Oh, so 7 on your. If you've got different IP addresses, if you've got then that's more.
Okay,
because
I'll remember that.
The computer doesn't know.
Because right now I'm unemployed. I can't afford
We've got to have this guy back in like 6 months to see what the state of things is.
Absolutely,
then.
I would love that.
I'd like that.
On.
Yeah,
let's keep in touch.
Fun.
George, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Much.
It's great.
Yes.
We're going to let you go and meet your wife at the Beans and Brew. She'll let you come back.
Here we go. George Pyle, Salt Lake Tribune.
Editorial page editor.
Editorial. Man, he's a writer. One of the best things you can do. It's very nice. Very nice. Thank you again, George.
Thank you. Appreciate it.